Hi everyone, it's Monique from Butterbee Scraps, and I'm here to do the third and final video in my charm tutorial series. And what we're going to do in this video is take all the materials and tools and the loops we learned to make in the second video and put them all together and make some charms. So the first charm I'm going to make using a head pin. Remember those head pins I talked about in the first video? That's what I'm going to be making the first charm with. So, because the end of these pins is flat and kind of boring, a lot of times I will start with just a round bead on the end. Oops. A round metal bead. And this one here I believe is 3 millimeters in diameter. And then what I do is I just alternate my beads, and here I'm putting some bead caps. Got a glass pearl, a nice glass aqua colored bead, and you remember the daisy spacers I was telling you about? I always use these between every bead. I just find that by alternating the beads with like a small metal spacer, it just offsets and separates the beads. Makes a charm look elegant, classy. I don't know. I like it. Okay, so I am going to create a wrap loop on the end of this charm. Now, you'll remember I showed you how to do the wrap loop in the second video. However, you say, okay, how do I do it on the end of a charm? Quite easily actually. Remember, I take the bent nose pliers in my dominant hand, and what I do is I place it right at the end of all those beads, and I kind of push down a little bit. Make sure those beads are nice and tight. And then I bend over at my 80-degree angle, just like I showed you. And that creates perfect placement for that loop. So again, just like the second tutorial, I'll use my round nose pliers to grab right in that joint there, right where it's bent, wrap the end, and see what I did here? It's not flat. That happens sometimes. So I'll just grab my nylon jaw pliers and flatten it out a bit. I make mistakes too, so no worries. It takes a little bit of practice to get this right. And I can see it's not centered, but I'll fix that in a minute. So now I'm going to wrap the end of this. Remember to put some tension on this wire as you wrap it. I'm going to cut the end off with my flush cutters. You'll find these head pins are usually made of a little bit harder wire, so they don't cut quite as easily, and actually they're a lot harder on your flush cutters. Okay, so you can see my loop is kind of weird and wonky there. So all I'm going to do, place that loop on my round nose pliers and bend the charm. There we go. And if I look from this angle, looks pretty good. I'll give it a slight tweak. And there's our first charm. Now I know what you're saying, but Monique, I'm just starting out and you told me I didn't need any head pins. That's right, you don't need any head pins. You can create your own head pins. And the way you do that is just by using the loops that I taught you in the second tutorial. So this next charm I'm going to create using just your standard P-loops. So I'm starting with one of the wires from my second tutorial with a P-loop on the end. And all you do is you put your beads and spacers on here, and I have to say it is very important that you make sure that the square end of the wire is flush with this tail. If it's not, your beads are going to start wrapping around this loop and it's going to look all crooked and weird, so that's very important. You'll notice sometimes I create symmetrical charms or asymmetrical. This first one obviously is not symmetrical, this one will be. So now what I'm going to do is show you how to create a P-loop on the second end of this charm. And what I try to do, just to add some symmetry, since you can see this loop is wrapped in this direction here, counterclockwise, I'm going to make sure this loop is wrapped in a clockwise direction. So what I'm going to do is use my bent chain nose pliers, and I'm going to grab the charm at the end here, but I'm not going to push those beads really tight. I'm going to leave it a little bit of slack there, not just enough so that we can bend this over and not squish the beads. So what I'm going to do, bend the wire at an angle. You want about 80 degrees there, just like with the wrap loop. Now here's the tricky part. What we need to do is cut part of this tail off, and the tricky part is getting this length right. And I've got a piece of wire here. I just want to demonstrate what happens if you get the length wrong. So you can see this end I've measured short. So if you measure short, and sorry, I'm going to grab this wire, the end here, and I'm going to wrap this. Oops. So essentially what happens is you end up, and now this I've made it especially short just to exaggerate the problem. You're not going to have a complete closed loop. So even if this end is, you know, just a fraction of a millimeter too short, you're going to have a gap between the end of your wire and the tail. Now, what if you measure too long? Well, if you measure too long, let's just wrap this. And I'm going at some weird funky angle here, but it's okay. I'll just flatten this out so it's easier for you guys to see. If you go too long, you're going to end up with a straight section of wire here, and it's going to look weird. Again, I exaggerated the issue. So the length you need is going to be dependent on the diameter of your loop here. And what I like to start off with is about 3/8 to half an inch in length. And as you can see here, it is better to cut it a little bit too long than too short, because if you're too short, you've got to start your whole charm all over again. If you're too long, you just cut part of this loop off and keep wrapping. So I'm going to cut this at just shy of half an inch. There goes my wire shooting across the room. Good reason to wear safety glasses. Okay. So now what I do is I grab the end of this wire. Actually, what I'm going to do, just so that I get even loops, is I'm just sticking my round nose pliers in there just so I can approximate where I should be wrapping this end, because I want the loops to look approximately the same size. And actually this is where, when you have your round nose pliers and you find a spot where you really like the size of the loop, mark it with a pen, whether it be a white paint pen or black Sharpie marker. If you draw a line, then you can always line up your wire at the same point on the round nose pliers every time. So that's a trick. And also, if you practice with making loops, you can determine exactly how long you need to make that tail when you cut the extra wire off. So just like we did before, and I'm going to work at a different angle here just because it's easier for me. You want to push the wire around your pliers. How did we do here? You can see my loop is at a bit of an angle. So actually I like using my bent nose pliers in my dominant hand. I don't know why, it's just more comfortable for me. Another thing I like to do to finish off a charm is make sure that both of these loops are in the same plane and straight. If you have one this way and one at an angle, see how unfinished that looks? It doesn't look finished, doesn't look professional. So just straighten it out. That looks pretty good. And if we check this loop out, you can see that there's a little tiny bit of a straight section there. So I cut this in a little bit too long. That's okay. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut a very small piece off the end there. And make sure that flat end of your flush cutters is towards the loop, because you want your nice square end to be on the loop. And I'm just going to rotate this around. There, that's a little bit better. And that finishes our second charm off. You can see the loops are wrapped in opposite directions. The end of the wire goes like this, and then this way, kind of like a figure eight. And both loops are in the same plane. So just like we use the P-loop here, you can use a wire and use wrap loops on either end. So what I did here is I've already started with a wrap loop. And this one's just going to be simple. I'm going to put a bead. I've got this, a small metal bead and this glass teardrop. And I'm going to create another wrap loop. And just like this one here where we want this loop wrapping this way and the other one in the opposite direction, I'm going to do the same here. So grab this with my bent nose pliers and I'm going to bend this at about 80 degrees. Use my round nose pliers to wrap a loop. Oops. Go this way so you can see. Loosen it off, and I rotated the pliers so that I can continue wrapping that wire. So now change hands. Put the round nose pliers in my non-dominant hand, and I'll use my bent nose pliers to wrap the wire. I'm going to cut it off there. And we're going to finish that, wrap that tail. Actually, I got to flip this over. Sorry guys, I'm kind of working, my vision is this way, so I'm trying to show you what I'm doing and I'm having a hard time seeing what I'm doing. It's usually not this awkward for me. So there we go. Now, you say, but what if I want to string several charms together? Now I've got these wrapped loops and I cannot open them. And that is correct. And this is where you got to think ahead a little bit. So, say you wanted to make this in 2 segments. What I've done here is I've got another charm started. I've got the wrapped loop, glass pearl, spacer bead, a crystal, another spacer bead, and a pearl. So what you want to do if you want to join these together is, now I create most of the charm first so that I'm not working with all this in my hands, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. And I start making another wrapped loop on this end. Okay. Now here's where you gotta think ahead. Before I wrap the tail of this around this part of the wire, I'm gonna take my bent nose pliers and I'm gonna twist, kind of like you would with the P-loop. So what you do is you end up with a bit of a spiral and a gap, and that's when you put this charm on there. And then what you do is give this a twist back, and your loop is still nice and round, yet it's closed, and you have 2 segments to this charm then. So now you're saying, okay, I can't stick my round nose pliers through here anymore to wrap that wire. This is true. And this is where having 2 pairs of the chain nose pliers comes in handy. So I use the bent nose in my non-dominant hand, and what I do is I grab this loop right at the base of the wire. You don't want to squish the loop on the other part of the charm here, so you got to work carefully. And what I do is I grab the end of this with my standard chain nose pliers, put some tension on that, and start wrapping. And that often happens. The wire slips out of my hand, so don't worry. Continue wrapping. And I have almost no slack there, so I'm going to cut the end off. Grab again with my bent nose pliers and just wrap the tip. And then you're left with a 2-piece charm. So that's it for my tutorial series. If you have any questions, please post them, ask me, put them in the comment section, and I will answer every single one of the questions. If there's something else you want to see in terms of charms, leave me a comment or send me a message, and I'll do the best I can to show you guys how to do it. Thanks for watching, guys, and have a great day. Bye-bye.